Stepp had just finished clearing out his yard when he discovered an old wristwatch buried a long way below the surface of the ground. Under the heavy coating of hardened dirt and sludge, was there an ancient Rolex buried away? Stephen paused. Was it better to throw the crumbling, filthy fragment in the garbage and go on? Or had he really struck it lucky and discovered a genuine treasure? Welcome to USA Stories channel. Do not forget to subscribe and activate the bell button to receive all new updates. Now let's go to the story. For the past 5 minutes, the jeweler had been studying the watch in silence. Stepp's enthusiasm and nervousness were getting the better of him. He hoped the jeweler would give him a price, an amount that would indicate if he had made a mistake or struck it lucky. For once in his life, Stephen longed for some good fortune, but optimism vanished as soon as he saw the jeweler's look. The jeweler tried to reply to Stephen with a stutter, but she was at a loss for words. Stephen reasoned that the jeweler was probably reluctant to declare the watch useless. When Stephen dug up his garden this afternoon, he never expected to discover anything. He expected to dig up stones and old roots, but not an antiquated clock. The watch was a happy accident. It looked nothing like a treasure, covered in a thick layer of filth. Instead, it looked like a bit of garbage. Since he had never lost a watch before, he was positive it wasn't his own. In addition, the watch appeared to have been buried here for a long time, even though he and his wife had only moved into this house a short while before. Stephen's first reaction was to give it a quick wash under the faucet in the hopes of finding a mark or other distinguishable characteristic. However, his wife talked him out of it the moment he brought up the notion. She'd never heard something so ridiculous before. Stephen thought this watch was unique, though. It had a narrative to tell, even though he was unable to put it into words. After talking it over, Stephen and his wife decided that taking the risk was acceptable. They thought the watch may be a bonus for when they retired, and if all went well, they might give some of the money to their cherished grandkids. Over the phone, Stephen confirmed the watch cleaning appointment, expecting that in 2 days it will appear brand new. Upon presenting the watch to the watchmaker, the specialist was genuinely taken aback, yet composed. The cleaner had rarely seen a watch in such a dismal shape, and this one was particularly bad. Much to everyone's relief, the watch turned out to be in rather good condition despite the difficulty in getting rid of the dirt. Still, not every component of the watch remained whole. Stephen had hoped that the watchmaker might determine the watch's worth by looking at its model or brand. Though he secretly hoped it was a Rolex or something, that was sadly not the case. The cleaner had never seen a watch like this one before and was unable to locate any brand marks on it. He even did an internet search, but to no avail. The cleaner's discoveries really upset Stephen, yet all of a sudden, disappointment gave way to enthusiasm. The watch was no longer merely a chance find in the garden once the cleaning was been finished. It had become a genuine investment after the expensive cleaning. But would this be a wise investment? It felt right, Stephen thought. Usually a watch's brand would tell us how much it was worth, but might an ancient watch that nobody knew about still be worth something? Had Stephen gotten it cleaned, which had been a terrible mistake? Stephen made the decision to take the watch to the jeweler he had called over the phone out of concern that his wife may be dissatisfied. This jeweler, he felt sure, was a master in his trade. Compared to the cleaner, there was a considerably greater likelihood that the specialist would recognize the watch. Stephen might be able to turn a profit on this unique watch. He had already paid an astounding €250 for the cleaning alone thus far. Stephen was shocked to see the store empty when he eventually made it there, perplexed by the time he pulled out his phone with haste. He discovered his wife had missed a call when he was unlocking it. Did she know more, or was she merely checking in on the status quo? The jeweler is phoning. As Stephen starts to wonder how the jeweler obtained his number, fear sets in. He inhales deeply before answering the phone. Stephen is asked by the jeweler if he has visited his business. Stephen pauses, questioning whether he made a mistake or possibly broke anything. Why is he being called by the jeweler? Stephen fears that the jeweler may be aware of his visit. The jeweler probes Stephen extensively, seeking to know what he saw, why he was there, and lastly, why he snapped a picture of the framed image. Overwhelmed by all the inquiries, Stephen attempts to leave the jeweler quickly. Why didn't he simply bring it up in the shop? Stephen attempts to put everything together, but nothing seems to fit. Thus, he chooses to go for a stroll. Stephen is walking along the sidewalk thinking about the watch. Stephen turns around as he hears a familiar voice shout his name. The jeweler is standing on the pavement, requesting to speak with you. That isn't precisely what Stephen had anticipated. The jeweler urged Stephen to come by his store around the corner, telling him he had some fascinating information concerning his watch. He pointed out to Stephen that he had visited there the day before, and he had gone to get coffee, so they had only missed each other by a few minutes. Stepp eventually consented in the hopes of learning something new. The jeweler started closely inspecting the watch as soon as Stephen gave it to him to look over. He made a comparison between it and the watch on the framed picture Stephen had discovered in his yard. The jeweler stared at Stephen for a few minutes before saying, "Considering the value of this watch, I'd like to offer you to keep it in my safe for the time being." Stephen made the decision to heed the jeweler's counsel, believing that he would probably also sell the watch, but as evidence, he asked for a receipt. Stephen rushed home and looked for his wife as soon as he had the receipt firmly in his pocket. He took a seat next to her and related what he had discussed with the jeweler. Stephen was still unable to respond to his wife's inquiry about the watch's value, albeit she was the one who asked it most. Stephen's wife was even more persuaded of the watch's worth after learning of everything. With confidence and joy, she questioned, "Darling, doesn't the jeweler's behavior indicate that the watch is truly something special?" Though Stephen wasn't sure what to do next, he couldn't disagree. He made the decision to detach himself from the watch for the time being, but he also made sure he remembered what was his. Stephen chose to give the jeweler a call. To be ready for the call, he and his spouse drafted a list of requirements, but he was taken aback when he heard who was on the other end of the call. The caller was obviously not the jeweler he had been spoken with. Stephen inquired, "Who are you?" After posing his query again, Stephen eventually received a response after first receiving none. The individual on the phone turned out to be a police SWAT squad member who was raiding the jeweler's business at the time. Stephen was stunned. He had no energy to demand an answer. He was utterly perplexed. There was still more to say from the SWAT officer. He clarified that Stephen needed to demonstrate that he had found the watch in his garden. Stephen began to regret the watch as he gazed at the just-planted salad bed. It dawned on Stephen that there was no getting out of his current situation. Furthermore, he was aware that proving his ownership of the watch would not be difficult. He had nothing to conceal, after all. He extended an invitation to the SWAT squad to visit his garden, where they could see the obvious signs of his digging. Stephen didn't anticipate, though, that the cops would come up to him right away. A few minutes later, Stephen's home was parked in front of other automobiles. The SWAT squad ignored Stephen and his wife and charged into the garden without pausing, who by then had returned home. While checking sure no one else entered the area, the cops cautiously collected mud samples from several locations across the garden. Stephen was forced to see the police's actions via the kitchen window. He saw someone putting a watch in a container to protect it from harm not long after the SWAT squad arrived. But it was obvious from the cops' grim expressions that Stephen's future was in jeopardy. Meanwhile, Stephen and his spouse were questioned in depth by two police officials. The majority of the inquiries concerned their home and landscaping. They were questioned about the length of time they had lived in this home and the modifications they had made to their garden over time. Stephen was baffled as to how the watch was involved in any of this. Photographers and videographers gathered in front of the house, stifled by police tape, to get images and recordings of the SWAT teams working in his garden. It was the jeweler, at last, that Stephen recognized. It took some time for him to be allowed entry inside the residence by the police. An official from the State Museum accompanied the jeweler. At last, the truth about the watch surfaced. It had originally belonged to a local tyrant who had long since died away. They even revealed that the watch belonged to the dictator and that he was wearing it when he passed away. Stephen and his spouse were overjoyed to learn that their finding would still provide some financial benefits despite all the costs, excitement, and bother. They were unsure about the watch's precise value, though. With great pleasure, the museum official disclosed the amount the museum was ready to pay, a staggering $35,000. With beaming smiles, Stephen and his spouse hugged and made plans for a little getaway. Please remember to subscribe to our channel, give us a thumbs up, and turn on the notification bell so you won't miss any of our videos. If you enjoyed the tale, the next video that plays on your screen will probably move you too.